Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world. This is a compressed structural companion to the deep dive. This is not a summary, this is not advice.
So in this explainer, we're diving into Angela Davis's 1969 lectures on liberation. We're going to use her work as a case study, really, to see how huge systems of institutional power don't just restrict freedom. They actually get inside our heads and completely rewrite the meaning of the word freedom itself.
Davis kicks things off by pointing out this huge, glaring paradox right at the heart of Western society. You know, on one hand, you have these beautiful, soaring ideas about liberty and what it means to be free. But on the other hand, the actual concrete reality for millions of people has been the exact opposite, just brutal, systematic enslavement. And look, this is way more than just hypocrisy. It's a deep, structural contradiction that we really need to understand.
So to unpack all that, we're going to follow a pretty clear path. We'll start with the paradox itself, then look at the system's architecture, its internal code, a really key mechanism of control, and finally, what makes it stick around.
All right, let's jump right in with that first piece, the paradox, this massive gap between the idea of freedom and the lived reality of it.
And as Davis shows, this isn't some recent problem. I mean, this goes way, way back. Think about ancient Greece. We talk about it as the cradle of democracy, right? But the majority of the people there, women, slaves, they were not free at all. Or fast forward to the American Founding Fathers. They're writing these incredible documents about liberty while literally owning other human beings and baking protections for slavery right into the Constitution, using careful, coded language to do it.
And this is where Davis makes a really sharp point. The very existence of black people in chains did more than just expose hypocrisy. It blew the lid off a fundamental flaw, not just in how freedom was practiced, but in the idea of freedom itself. Because if your grand theory of liberty can exist side by side with mass enslavement, well, then there's something deeply wrong with the theory itself.
Okay, so that leads to the next logical question. How does a paradox like that get built into an actual functioning system? What's the architecture that's holding this whole thing up?
What Davis lays out is a system of racialized domination, and this wasn't just, random bias. It was an entire institutional machine designed for two things: hierarchy and economic extraction. And it was all propped up by these powerful justifications from law, religion, and philosophy.
Let's just quickly break that down. First up, you've got the legal design. The Constitution carefully avoids the word slavery, but uses phrases that do the exact same work. Then you have the philosophical justification. I mean, you have thinkers as far back as Plato and Aristotle creating the intellectual cover, arguing that some people are just naturally born to be slaves. And finally, the economic engine of the whole thing, turning human beings into property, into chattel.
So that's the what of the system. But what about the how? What's the internal logic, the code that's running on this machine?
Here's a really helpful way to think about it. Imagine the system is like a locked operating system. It's a closed loop, and its main job is to take a core concept, a really important one, like freedom, and just rewrite its definition to serve the system's own goals. It changes the meaning of words to keep itself going.
And you can see exactly how this recoding works right here. Within this system for the master, freedom means the power to control other people. His freedom is literally defined by someone else's unfreedom. But for the slave, through their own lived experience, they come to a totally different and honestly a much deeper understanding. Freedom for them isn't about switching places. It's about destroying the entire relationship of master and slave altogether.
So what does a system like this actually produce? Well, the main output is this deep, corrosive alienation. Davis calls it a violation of nature, something that just twists and distorts everyone involved. The slave is obviously alienated from their own humanity, but the system is so toxic it damages the slave owner too.
And this creates this really fascinating, vicious cycle. The oppressor actually ends up trapping himself. In his constant effort to control others, he becomes, as Davis puts it, a slave to his own brutality, to his own misconceptions. The system ends up snaring both of them, just in very, very different ways.
Now let's zoom in on one of the most powerful tools in this system's toolbox, a tool that, weirdly enough, could cut both ways: religion. On one hand, religion was a perfect stabilizer for the system. It was used to teach people that slavery was God's will, to hammer home messages of obedience and patience, and to promise that all their suffering would be rewarded in the afterlife. But, and this is the key, it was also a destabilizer. Because those same religious texts also talked about the equality of all people in the eyes of God, and those wish dreams of heaven could easily turn into demands for justice right here, right now. It became fuel for resistance.
And this wasn't an accident. This quote here from the historian Kenneth Stamp really shows you how calculated this all was. The system was designed to make rebellion feel like not just a crime against your owner, but a sin against God himself. It was a very clever and very cynical form of psychological control.
Okay, that brings us to our final big question. How does a system like this stick around for so long? What makes it so persistent, and what's its legacy?
The answer is pretty simple and pretty brutal: enforced ignorance. The system keeps itself alive by keeping people in the dark. I mean, the words of Frederick Douglass's owner say it all. Knowledge was the ultimate threat, because you can't enslave a mind that has learned to think for itself. To maintain the system, you had to maintain ignorance.
And it's this enforced ignorance that creates what we can call a profound crisis in perception. It's a situation where the lofty, abstract language of liberty is used to actively hide the brutal material reality of unfreedom. The system survives precisely by managing this gap between what it says and what it actually does. But as the story of Frederick Douglass himself shows us, there is a way out, and it's a three-step path. It starts with asking that one fundamental question: why am I a slave? From there, you seek out knowledge, which Douglass called the direct pathway to freedom. And that leads to the final step: resistance. The understanding that freedom isn't just something you're given, it has to be won.
And this gets to the heart of Davis's whole analysis. True, real liberation isn't about just fixing a few problems with the system or making it a little nicer. It means you have to dismantle the entire institution, because the root causes that gave rise to it in the first place, well, they're still around.
So, this leaves us with a really critical question to ask ourselves. Davis showed how a very specific, censored version of Christianity was used to maintain control. So we have to ask, if powerful systems today still persist by controlling the stories we tell, what are the modern equivalents of that censored scripture? What narratives are shaping our perceptions right now? Crisis in Perception examines how systems shape belief and how better tools help us see clearly. This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind Crisis in Perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon. For a longer, audio-based analysis of this topic, see the deep dive linked in the description. If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.